Dungeons and Desserts is a roguelite dungeon crawler where you also manage a pastry shop. It comes to us from Top Chop Games, and this is their first game. Now, this is a game of two halves, dungeon crawling and shop management, but that's not all on offer here. There's also a sprinkling of deep narrative and life simulation here too. You play as an aspiring shop owner called Crispin, who is running a humble bakery in a small town and seemingly able to dungeon delve via a mysterious portal found in the back room of the shop. As you delve into the dungeon, you encounter your friend Taffy, who seems to be a member of the occult, and really not too bothered about your extracurricular dungeon delving activities. They will actually help you get to grips with the combat mechanics of the dungeon. You will get to select bakery-themed weapons and abilities, and depending on the items chosen, your experience through the dungeon can be significantly changed. The dungeons are like many roguelites before it. Depending on the path that you take through the floors of the dungeon, you can gain temporary ability boosts, unlock new items for your bakery, or just gain currency to unlock new permanent abilities. Now, what might be a little off-putting for some players is that the dungeon world is in fact made of sweets, or candy for my American friends. Now, you can fully destroy the environment to collect the sweet treats, and then you use those sweet treats to create bakery items that you sell in your shop. The actual shop management does seem fairly simple within the scope of this demo, really just doing it to progress the time of day or the narrative, but really at this point you will see more of the dungeon than the shop front. As the demo reaches its conclusion, your sick grandfather who owns the bakery shop unfortunately has to sell the shop to pay for his medical bills, which means you now have to report to a new corporate entity called Sweetco, who is enforcing rent and very tight timelines. Through this narrative development, all of a sudden the shop management aspect of the game becomes a lot more important, as you cannot earn real money in the dungeons, but it is the only way to gain stock to sell at the shop, which you need to pay rent. All of a sudden, this cozy game becomes so much more stressful. Now, the game is due for release in Q4 of 2026, but you don't have to wait to sink your teeth into this game, as the demo is currently available on Steam. This is my first time playing a game like this, where two completely separate games converge to create one cohesive experience. On paper, you would assume that the shop management and roguelite dungeon crawling wouldn't really be a great fit for each other, but given the interesting world and characters that are presented to you, I can totally see how these two games come together as one. Especially with the narrative turn that is presented to you towards the end of the demo. It provides a really interesting kind of player choice, where you now need to decide whether it's worth spending more time in the dungeon, gaining new skills and inventory, or just actually running the shop and trying to gain enough money to pay off your corporate landlords. The whole game is presented in this really nice 2D, 3D art style, where the dungeons are presented with this really fantastic 2D pixel art aesthetic, while the real world is presented in 3D with the characters retaining their 2D visage. Now, separating the art styles between the two worlds really does sell the idea that these are two halves of the same game, and I really do think that it actually does help with some visual differences as you continue to play the game. Now, just to note, there are several mechanics that are not available within the demo, such as the cafe. Now, there is no real indication as to how this works, but I presume it's just another avenue for revenue. This allows for coffee options as well as food, and there are options for larger sweet bundles which may also generate more money. So I can see how progression works in the final game, but the demo doesn't provide any real indication as to how the progression will work. Now, I do have my concerns as to how smoothly the two halves of this game converge. There's seemingly a lot to juggle, and it's going to take a masterclass in game design to nail that balance perfectly. The demo is definitely a success in terms of dealing with that balance. However, it's clear that this is just the surface, and things are going to get only more complicated as the game continues. Managing the roguelite aspects of weapons, abilities, different levels of the dungeons, inventory, weight management, these are all complicated features in their own right. The idea that having to manage the look and productivity of a shop and ensuring that my character going to town to mingle with the inhabitants to further the story and relationships seems like a narrative nightmare. And I don't say this to be a negative Nancy, but this could end up coming off as busy work and potentially being just too cumbersome to end up enjoying in the final game. Also, as a personal nitpick, this game has you holding the A button constantly to progress through load zones and conversations, and I really hate holding the A button to confirm a selection. It's something that I've noticed specifically since the first Destiny came out all those years ago, and I specifically really hate holding buttons to progress on a menu. So let this be a note to other games I end up previewing. I will be docking points if your game has me holding a goddamn button to move from one menu to another or to just end a dialogue sequence. Dungeons and Desserts is a complex mix of two complex game types. I have my reservations about the developers being able to handle the balancing act of ensuring the player is not too overwhelmed by the two gameplay systems being too complicated to manage. But that remains to be seen in the final version of the game. Currently in the demo, it's clear that the balancing act is working, but it could quickly spiral out of control. I would argue that this is a game that is one to watch. I'm not too familiar with either genre that this game features, so I will be eagerly keeping an eye on the development of the game through the next coming months, and I'm excited to hear the general opinion of this game in the comments down below.